Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on the Red Desert playing as the Skaven against the forces of Brettonia. And this map, it's one of those maps where there's a huge ridge in the middle with the Red Desert. And these maps, in my opinion, are some of the more problematic maps. They're not necessarily the worst maps. There's some very heavily wooded maps in multiplayer that are really bad in my opinion. But maps that have such a significant sort of a line of sight blocker that just takes up half the map, and the map isn't really that big in general, I think are really tough and really problematic, and they kind of really screw over certain factions. So going into this match, I knew that as Skaven, I'd only had two options. One would be to go super artillery heavy and sort of camp back here somewhere, and the other was to go super aggressive and try to go for my opponent's throat. So what I decided to do was go aggressive, and simply push up to the hill and try to slug it out with my opponent in a straight up brawl. So for my Lord, I did decide to bring Lord Skrulk because he's just the go-to, but also because he's got some good choices for when you need to just slug it out. He's got Pestilent Breath, which is actually really good against the Brettonians. You can melt men-at-arms, you can melt peasant bows, you can melt all those units pretty effectively with Pestilent Breath. He's got Vermintide, so I can summon clan rats, and Pestilent Burst, so I can summon plague monks, all of which I really need to shut down my opponent's backline, because I simply can't afford to let my opponent's archers or his backline troops really wreak havoc on my shooting, and especially on my support weapons, because I've got these Poison Wind Globadiers here that I really need to stay online, and I can't afford to let them get shot to death. Otherwise, we of course do have Stand Your Ground. We do have Rod of Corruption as well as the Libra Bonicus. Obviously not a great tool against the Fey Enchantress, but if your opponent decides to bring the Green Knight, if your opponent decides to bring Damsels or Paladins, or even against Cavalry, it's not a bad tool at all. It's got a similar effect to Spirit Leech, so that's pretty solid against Cav. You can take off a lot of models. And finally, Contaminated Arm is not bad against Brettonia either, because Brettonian troops don't have the greatest leadership, and you don't really see the Grail Relic all that often anymore, so the Contaminated effect can be pretty useful. You can quickly break troops oftentimes, especially because Skrulk also has Fear on top of that. Now for my front line here, I decided to go dirt cheap. Well, not necessarily dirt cheap, maybe, but by Skaven standards, nothing crazy elite. A bunch of Clan Rat Spears with shields. These guys, of course, can soak up some arrow fire. They can trade okay with men-at-arms. I'm not entirely sure who wins in a straight-up fight. It's probably one of those wet noodle contests that really doesn't impress either way. But most importantly, they do have anti-large and charge defense against large. So if my opponent went super cav heavy, I would have something to absorb those charges and stall. Supporting them, a handful of Skaven Slave Spears, some normal Skaven Slaves back here, basically just fodder units, so that no matter which angle my opponent tries to get in on me from, I'm going to be blocking him off, and he's not going to have the mass to push through. In the back line, we do have 3 units of Stormmen Halberds. I don't want these guys getting engaged initially. I don't want them sliding out with foot squires or anything of that sort. I want these guys in the back ready to pivot and deflect enemy heavy cav. So these Knights of the Realm, or units like Companions of Quenelles or Grail Knights, you often see a whole plethora of different Brettonian cav in this matchup, because in this matchup you don't necessarily have to go elite as Brettonian, but you can to snipe out certain units like Helped Abominations, and so you'll see basically the full breadth of Brettonian cavalry. You'll see just about everything, and so I think it's good for the storm to keep the Stormmen alive and ready to flex and defend. Finally, 2 Rat Ogres to provide some additional mass, and then 4 units of Poison and Globadiers, which I'm not a big fan of, but I think that if you really need to nuke large quickly, these guys can do the trick. They've got uninspiring missile damage on paper, but when you look at the AP, it's almost all AP damage, 36 pop, and a bonus first large of 32, and the vast majority of that is 90% of that 32 is the AP. So you're basically looking at over 60 damage a hit with of AP with Poison Wind Globes, and they've got magic which bypasses physical resistances and all that sort of stuff. So they're really solid units, I think, for beating Brettonia if you can just protect them, which is what I was really concerned about here, because I didn't want my opponent just piling through. If my opponent managed to push through his Knights of the Realm, through my Clan Rats, and immediately compromise my Poison Wind Globes, things get very hairy very quickly, and that's why we've got 4 of them. That's why they're so spread out. That's why we've got Rat Ogres and all this coverage. My opponent decided to roll with double Damsel of Heavens. Now, an interesting choice here. I assume he was trying to do some sort of blob and bombard. I'm not entirely sure why he decided to double up on Uran's Thunderbolt and Harmonic Convergence. Both very good spells, but Harmonic Convergence is a good spell. Uran's Thunderbolt, not so much. Honestly, if you're going against Skaven, I'd recommend bring Wind Blast if you're trying to bring Lore of Heavens. But interestingly enough, my opponent decided to do double Damsels, and then the Fey Enchantress, who's back here somewhere. I'm not even entirely sure where she is, though. She's over here with her cav. She's only got Regrowth, and of course bombardment and mist and all that sort of stuff. So not entirely sure why my opponent decided to double up on Damsels of Heavens. I think he would have been better off bringing more cavalry, 1 more unit of cav you could probably afford for these guys. But perhaps he was hoping to blob me and bombard me a whole bunch, or he was expecting a lot of artillery, in which case the Uran, and as you can see, he's pushing forward here, probably hoping that if I brought a bunch of Warp Lightning cannons, he'd be able to nuke them down with the Uran's Thunderbolt. For his cav, he brought Companions of Canals and Triple Knights of the Realm, so respectable though not amazing cavalry contingent. Certainly they can bust through my front lines, certainly they can harass pretty heavily, but they don't have that perfect vigor, they don't have that physical resist, they don't have the craziest melee stats certainly, or the craziest charge bonus or anything of that sort. For his front line, my opponent went with a whole bunch of men-at-arms, unshielded variants, so these guys will not trade particularly well against my Clanrat Spears. They're probably going to win. I don't know. They've got really low HP, so I'm not even sure if they would win against Clanrats, to be quite honest. But it's going to be a wet noodle contest there. And they are backed by some foot squires as well as the Beast Slayers of Bastogne, so a very hefty support contingent there. And then 3 units of firebows, who are immediately going to start teeing off on my poison globes. And you can see we're actually going to duck behind the ridge here, trying to stay out of range because I just don't want to be getting shot. I'm willing to let this fight sort of degenerate into a bunch of fighting between Skaven slaves and Clanrats and men-at-arms, and you just use Skrulk here to break up my opponent's formation. Skrulk, of course, will be contaminating. He's going to be doing quite a bit of damage with his own. He's not a pushover in melee. He's got over 400 weapon strength and over 60 melee attacks, so he's going to be hitting these guys consistently. He's going to be taking down models, and he's going to be contaminating them. So you can see he's doing pretty well here. Immediately we get a bit of a breath, but it's not a perfectly aimed one. I set it up too far down the line here, so I didn't really get a beautiful cast there, and it doesn't get any kills. But we do get a nice little Rod of Corruption here, which is melting all of these troops. My opponent's entire blob here, 4 units, is being caught and melted by Skrulk. So Beast Slayers of Bastogne taking a huge pounding. We do get a Clanrat summon now in the backline, which is going to be able to start pressuring these peasant bows. And then the anti-large formation here is pivoting. You can see we're repositioning our halberds over here. I can't really get shots into my opponent's cav because his cav, because I don't have range. Maybe once we get war blockers jails, I might be able to force an opponent to push in. But until then, all I can do is let the poison wind globes here get pressured, let them get beaten down. There's not much you can do about it. They've got 100 armor, fortunately, so they'll be able to soak up a decent chunk of damage. But nonetheless, definitely not the situation I want. Now, the Plague Monk Summon is going to smulch these peasant bows with fire arrows, and in the meantime, the Clanrat Spears are going to push through, going after the Fey Enchantress, so getting some good value there. You can see a Combat of Casandora is going to come down, or the Chalice of Potions, but in the meantime, the peasant bows have gotten busted. These peasant bows have been bogged down and taken quite some beating before the damsels came in to save them. And you can see the Comet completely whiffs. And in the meantime, you can see the Companions of Canal trying to sort of help. They came over on this flank, tried to help a little bit, but now they're trying to save their archers, save these men-at-arms, who are in full retreat, which is really brutal. My opponent's lost his entire center. You can see Skrulk here beating away at the Beast Slayers. And here in the backline, engagements are going down. You can see I got a less than optimal engagement here. Rat Ogres should not be absorbing cavalry charges, but I really just want to stop these guys from getting into my globes. So the Rat Ogres dove in, they soaked up the charge, they took a pounding, but these knights just took an absolute beating in return with all those globes pouring in, just doing huge amounts of work. And so these knights are now full retreat. We managed to get 1 unit almost crippled and 2 in very bad shape. And we still have a lot of globes online, and certainly they're being chipped away at by the archers, but the archers, having focused there this entire game, are just going to start to struggle. And you can see we actually managed to burst down 1 unit of peasant bows here, and then summon more Clanrats on these peasant bows. So we're constantly just whittling my opponent down. Skrulk is now going to shift over to this flank where the foot squires are being a little dominant. And here you can see the Companions of Quenelle, despite trying pretty hard, we did hit them with Libra Bonicus. We managed to take off quite a few models there. And Plague Monks and the Spears will tie them down. Though certainly these men-at-arms are going to escape. I'm not too concerned about them. We need to get the peasant bows off the field, which is much more important. The peasant bows are just such a huge threat. I can't afford to get them let them get in my globes. The Knights of the Realm here are going to dive into the peasant in my globes, and my globes are too clumped because I've been trying to push them into support over in this fight, where the Rat Ogres as well as the Stormmen completely dumpstered these knights. But these Knights of the Realm, they don't have the AP values really to cut through these poison wind globes quickly with their 100 armor. And now they're bogged down, and now they're just going to get pounded by the handful of globes that is still online, by the halberdiers that are going to storm in. And they're going to start getting torn from the saddle and getting taken to Pound Town because, there's a lot of Skaven here. The halberds, no pushovers in melee. They're not terrible necessarily. Certainly they're not a great unit for their cost, but against Knights of the Realm, they're more than adequate. You can see the Rat Ogres are going to come in from the front with just hammering down on these guys. And these poor knights really just fall apart. Unfortunately over here though, I did pull away with the Stormmen thinking this fight was completely won. These guys had routed, so I figured, we're going to be able to force them off easy. So my opponent gets a counter charge. He's going to get the Knights of the Realm in against the Rat Ogres. And these guys do have bonus rush large, so they're going to pound my Rat Ogres' faces in and really come out on top there. Unfortunately for my opponent though, continuous Clanrat summons are pressuring down these peasant bows. You can see Skrulk is in here, helping out his Clanrat Spears, beating down these Damsel of Heavens. Unfortunately, we do get nuked there and lose some Clanrat Spears, but, they're fighting the good fight. They're trying to take down the Fey Enchantress, and they're doing their very best. And Skrulk, of course, doing an okay job in here as well. Meantime, the Companions of Canal, 27 models still, up to 120 kills, but they just haven't been killing critical units. They need to be on these globes, they need to be on these Rat Ogres or these Stormmen or something. and they're just not doing that there. They've been dealing with clan rats and plague monk summons. So all of a sudden, balance of power, you can see slowly but surely tilting in my favor. Over here, these clan rats are going to win out against the men-at-arms, so perhaps they do win out in the long run. These knights over here got rid of the rat ogres, but it's just one tattered unit of Knights of the Realm now. The beaten up unit actually routed off the field, so at this point, you can see the Companions of Canel are going to dive in here against Skrulk, but they're getting pounded in the face by those globes. You can see they're just raining in from all angles. Lee Ruronicus is going to go down, which of course is going to be killing a model at take, basically, and these Companions of Canel completely fall apart. Of course, you don't want to be using Lee Ruronicus on Faye, because she's got 60% magic resist, but you can see the Fae Enchantress here forced off by the halberds. My opponent really needed the Fae fighting in the middle of a pocket of troops to be getting value out of her Mortis Engine effect, but she just wasn't able to pull it off. The Companions of Canel there getting almost nothing out of the favor of the Fae, forced to rout within a few seconds. These men-at-arms do try to disrupt here and be a nuisance, but, you know, we're going to get, once again, Poison Wind Globes, they've got armor, and we're going to get rat ogres in here against the men-at-arms. We're going to get some Stormvermin, we're going to dumpster these guys, and take them to Pound Town. So you can see these men-at-arms having a horrible time of it. Certainly my opponent's forced off some globes, but that tide of disgusting Skaven filth is just pouring in constantly, doing a lot of hurt, and my opponent just doesn't really have the tools to stop me. You can see these Knights of the Realm trying to get a charge off, trying to be a little courageous there and do the lady proud, but immediately just losing a massive chunk of their army, and my opponent at this point is going to GG out. Skrulk had been forced to rout, but he was down there somewhere, the filthy rat, and he actually escaped. So, a tough map, I think, for Skaven and artillery factions in general, though, unless you plan to go super campy and just let your opponent dictate the pace of things. In retrospect, I do assume that my opponent brought the double damsels expecting an artillery build, which I decided not to go with. I'm not personally a fan of camping on map. If I can avoid it, if you can force your opponent to come to you with artillery, I think that's great. But if you're forced, if it's a map where you have to just sit tight and you can't really afford to flex, because your artillery would get screwed over, I just don't think, I'm not the biggest fan of it, because letting your opponent dictate the pace, even if you might be able to have a strong defensive position, is not good in my opinion. As a player, I just much prefer being the guy who's deciding the pace of things. I don't want to be letting my opponent dictate the pace of the game, and in my opinion, that screws over a lot of players. A lot of players who play campy end up paying the price because they're just not able to flex fast enough. They're not able to respond. They're forced to be responding, and they can't really decide the pace at which the game goes. As far as the build goes, I think if you're trying to rush, if you feel forced to rush against Brettonia, I think it's okay. I'm not as convinced. I don't play enough Skaven, I think, to really judge super accurately, but Lord Skrulk does let you melt Knights okay with Spirit Leech effect. From Lee Ruronicus, you got that AoE melting effect, which honestly helped even out that frontline fight. My opponent's Foot Squires and the Beast Slayers would have easily manhandled these Clanrat Spears, probably, but because of Skrulk sort of evening the tide there with his Rod of Corruption, we were really able to stabilize things. And his Clanrat summons really managed to compromise all these peasant boats, who would have been an absolute menace otherwise. The Skaven Slay Spears racking up a surprising amount of kills, able to sort of plug in gaps, which I wasn't really highlighting in that game, but they were able to sort of plug in gaps that my other units could not plug in time. They were able to get thrown into the fray, just tie down men-at-arms and units like that, and buy me time that I needed. Skaven Slaves last surprisingly well in protracted melee against bad units, because of strength in numbers, so never underestimate them there. And the Poison Wind Globes, they did their country proud. It's what, over 60 kills between them against cavalry, and that's competing with rat ogres for the honor as well. So basically, these guys countered my opponent's cavalry hard. Now, as far as cost efficiency goes, I'm not sure if it was all that cost effective. Probably not. My opponent was incredibly cost ineffective in the front line fight. I think largely because he didn't really have proper backline defense. The fact that he used Knights of the Realm on that big flanking maneuver meant they weren't available to defend against Clanrat summons, against Plague Monk summons, against units, things like that. So my opponent really struggled against those, so he wasn't efficient in the front line fight. But on the flip side, I wasn't very efficient in the backline defense. I was forced to commit a whole bunch of Stormmen. I had to commit all of my Poison Wind Globes and the Rat Ogres, 2 of them, so I probably paid a lot more than my opponent did to annoy my backline. He paid like 3,000, where I paid more than that in just 1 Rat Ogre and 4 Wind Globes. So then again, the archers got baited onto the Poison Wind Globe, so it's a bit of a give and take situation. But regardless, good evening to my opponent, Haka Blanca here. It was a lot of fun. Also cool to see some interesting build decisions. I personally wouldn't recommend, even if you're worried about artillery with Skaven, in my opinion, the best way to deal with it as Brettonia is to suck it up and push through. Let your infantry advance, your infantry take the lead, let them soak up as much artillery as you can. Try to use, there is some cover on that map, there are some trees and stuff like that. Try to get as close as you can to your opponent's artillery and then rush, and just accept the fact that you might lose a few knights. You might lose a lot of knights. You might lose, if your opponent focus fires really well, you might lose an entire unit of cavalry before you make it to your opponent's lines. But once you're in there, once you're able to plow through, and that's if your opponent goes super heavy on artillery. So if your opponent doesn't, you're basically fine. And even if they do go heavy on artillery, once you're in there, you can really compromise them. You can really screw them over. Just pile through with whatever knights you've got. Keep them in lines formation. Just keep them darting from artillery piece to artillery piece and really ruining them. So that's my opinion on it. I don't think it's worth trying to sort of magic your way through it. If you're going to magic your way through it, maybe bring in a damsel with an amber spear. It's an okay spell against artillery, but I wouldn't really recommend it personally. Regardless, like I said, good game. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it entertaining and perhaps a little informative on the matchup and on how to deal with these sorts of maps. And I would recommend similar strats if you're playing as a faction like Dwarves, or if you're playing as a faction like even Empire, other factions that rely on artillery. Well, as Empire, actually probably not, because you can bring mortars. But for other factions that might be rather artillery dependent or relying on standoff distances, you can oftentimes catch your opponent by surprise on maps like this by being aggressive and pushing forward, and it can often work out much better than you would expect. The fact that my opponent also had to close the gap a little bit more here and allow me to get more value on my poison globes was also nice. It does play into your favor a little bit too. So regardless, good game to my opponent. Like I said, I do apologize for the rambliness here, but I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe below to keep up with additional content, share, all that sort of stuff. If you have any comments, any criticism, as usual, do not hesitate to post them. I will do my best to respond. If you have any suggestions or any requests as well, as usual, just comment. I do try to spice comps up and mess around with different things, but if you guys have something in particular you'd like to see, I can always try to get the matchup or get the build you guys want. So be sure to let me know. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.